I'm Lauren and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to teach you how to mix colors for a basic gouache palette. In other words, this is your Gouache 101 class. So my first recommendation is to purchase a really good foundation of colors to work with. I really find that the basic primary set just isn't enough, at least for me. But I'm happy to tell you which colors I find essential and that I really just couldn't do without. So I use the high quality brand Winsor & Newton simply because these little paints will last a very, very long time. And so I don't know, this is just my personal philosophy, but I'd rather spend a few extra dollars now instead of regretting buying a cheaper brand in a year or two and then throwing them away and like wasting the paint. I mean, these paints will last you a long time. They may, depending on how much you're painting, they may last you 5 years, they may last you 10 years. So honestly, I would just go with a higher quality brand because you're just gonna be happier with them. So these are the colors that I really do recommend the most. And I kind of divided them out because they are usually about $10 per tube. And so if you really just can't afford to buy all of these, then I would start with this group here because you can do some mixing. You know, like I have purple here, but of course you can mix blue and red to get your purples. But I do find that it is really beneficial if you can afford it to go ahead and get this really pure spectrum purple because it's not going to mix necessarily exactly the way you want to the purest color. So here I have Viridian Green, which is a more blue-based green, and a Sap Green, which is more of a yellow-based green. I have Cadmium Yellow, which has a little bit of an orange tint, as well as a Lemon Yellow, which is just more pure. I have a Phthalo Blue, which is a more green-based blue, and an Ultramarine Blue, which is more purple-based or cooler blue. Crimson Red, Cadmium Red, which I may actually go back on if I recommend this red versus a different red just because it doesn't mix well because it is so opaque, and I will show you that in just a minute. You obviously want to have your white and your black, and they come in a bigger tube, which is really nice. And then if you're gonna have some neutrals, I do really recommend having a yellow ochre, a flesh tint, a burnt sienna, and a burnt umber just to kind of get some nice, natural tones there. And I love, love, love this opera pink. It is really hard to get a good pink, and you're not gonna get this type of color from mixing white with either of these reds. So I would recommend this. It's just a very vibrant color, as well as the Spectrum Violet. And then I also love using this Brilliant Violet. So I mean, if you're on a budget, you could start out with these and then slowly kind of add some of these in. But these are the colors that I'm using, and yeah. So as you'll see here, I'm going ahead and gridding off my color chart. I'm just using a pencil and a ruler, so however you want to do it is fine, but I do recommend using a pencil just so you can erase if you make a mistake. And I am leaving a little bit of space below each color swatch so that I can write the color name or the number, and I'm going to put black and white here in the very first two columns on the top. And then I'm going to put my blues on the side. So the original color is going all the way across the top and all the way down on the left side. And then they will mix as we go across, and the colors kind of meet up on the grid. So gouache is an opaque water-based paint. It's very similar to watercolor except for that it contains much more pigment and has a higher density. It has a matte finish, as you can see here, and it dries rather quickly, although you can totally re-wet the paint, unlike acrylics where it's dry, it's dry. So you'll see that as I'm making this color chart, it's totally okay for the gouache to dry before I add the next color because it can totally re-wet and mix all the colors. I can mix the color on the swatch itself, basically. Just make sure to kind of circle your brush around in a mixing motion on the actual swatch. You can also judge if you think you need to add a tiny bit more of the original color or if it looks like an even mix as you're mixing it. So here I'm just adding the original color across all three, and then I'm adding a black to the first column, and then I'm adding white to the second column so that you can see how it mixes. Do keep in mind that colors dry as a slightly different color than when they're wet, which is why referring to a color chart like this is such a great system to work with as you're actually painting your real paintings. So because of its bold, flat quality, gouache paint is a wonderful medium for illustration, and just like watercolor, it can be used as a fine art medium as well. Because it's so similar to watercolor, you can use a lot of the same art supplies, such as your watercolor paper, which is what I'm using for this color chart, your watercolor brushes, which is also what I'm using here, of course your same water jar and palette. Now, because gouache paints are bought in these little tubes that you see over on the side, and they come already wet, I do recommend buying an empty palette like the one you'll see on the right side here. It was actually empty when I bought it, but of course I have squeezed my paints into these little cubes and mixed them as I was getting my colors. So you can, once you have your color chart, you can decide which colors are the most important to you and kind of the most relevant to your body of work, and you can mix those colors in the little empty cubes. So for example, if you're painting a lot of landscapes, you may want to fill your palette with predetermined, greens and browns and blues that you choose from your color chart, because on the color chart you'll see all the different options and all the different colors you can really get from mixing like this. You can also, of course, fill the little cubes with pure original color and leave the mixing to be done on a separate palette as you're painting. But for me, sometimes I have a hard time remembering how I mixed the colors in the past. And it's just so for consistency purposes, I like to sometimes pre-mix my colors in the little cubes, and then I can use them over and over again. They do dry out just like watercolor, but all you have to do is add some water to your palette and they will re-wet pretty easily. So as you can see here, I have mixed the red and blues, basically the horizontal top row with the left column, and so then I added a second row beside each color to add some white. Now you can also add black, so you would have 3 to each color. 3 columns to each color is what I mean. But some of these colors already came out super dark as I was mixing, so I didn't really feel the need to add black to all of these, but I did want to add white just to see kind of how that color mixed. So here I'm just going to finish the blues, the column of color all the way across the row so that I am really getting an even mix of that color throughout all of the swatches, and I probably should have started out with this, but that's okay. So I'm just going to add the cadmium yellow now and the lemon yellow, and the next one is actually a lime green, although it is looking very similar to that lemon color. And then you'll see as I'm adding the whites, it does make the color much more opaque and lighter. So it's also kind of desaturating the color. So if you're wanting to get a lighter color but also keep the richness and the vibrancy of your color, then you should just add more water just like you would with watercolor. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, if you wanted to hold off on buying some of those neutrals, you can see this whole range of browns that I'm getting from mixing my reds with the greens especially. Complementary colors will kind of get a brown color or a muddy color. But some of these desaturated colors can be very sophisticated if you use them wisely, and sometimes the desaturated colors mix really nicely with vibrant colors. So you'll see as we're creating this whole color chart which colors you could actually use together. Another option is that you could create a second color chart just like this and cut up all of your swatches and try to kind of pair them together just like a Pantone palette, or a palette made out of Pantone chips. I do recommend keeping your original palette intact so that you can always go back and see which colors you actually mixed together. And I did leave this space below each swatch so that you can go back and number each swatch if you want to label it that way or give it a name. So you'll see, like I mentioned, if you're painting landscapes, mixing all of your yellows and blues and greens are going to give you just this really nice spectrum of greens. And when you're adding the whites, of course, you get some more desaturated tones and lighter tones. You can also play around with adding more browns or blacks to these greens, and you just have a whole spectrum of color to use in landscape paintings. So that's pretty much it for the color chart. If you like this video, make sure to check out this video as well, and make sure to hit the bell and subscribe so that you won't miss my next video, okay? And check out the description below for all sorts of freebies and links to all sorts of goodies. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.